My father was the ninth boy. That's a specific kind of title in our portion of India. It has a particular weight, almost like a myth. The last piece of the puzzle, the last child born into a big family. According to everyone, he was the most loved, spoiled, and angry of all his brothers and sisters. You hear stories like that about younger kids all the time, but for my dad, it wasn't just a label. It was the engine that drove his whole existence. That fire in his belly, the one that made my grandmother grin and sigh, was the same fire that would one day burn down a monster's world and make a 19-year-old kid a legend in his community. You need to know about the world he grew up in to get the story. There weren't any faceless faces or police sirens breaking the night in this metropolis. It was a hamlet where everyone knew each other and their lives were all interwoven. In a manner, everyone's business was everyone's business. The seasons, not the clock, set the pace of life. The air was heavy with the smell of cow doing fires, cardamom tea, and the pleasant smell of jasmine vines creeping over old brick buildings. Family wasn't simply essential, it was the center of your universe. Your name didn't just belong to you. It also belonged to your parents, siblings, and ancestors. And respect. Respect was the money we used to trade. It was more valuable than land, more precious than gold. My dad, who we'll call Raj, had a simple, predictable existence of luxury. He toiled in the family's fields, played cricket with his buddies in the dusty lanes, and listened to the old stories given by the village elders at night. As the ninth son, he was protected from the worst parts of life. His older brothers took care of the hard work. His sisters loved him very much. Things were good. It was neat. His older sister Priya was the brightest star in his own sky. She was the kindest person you could ever meet, and her laugh could make even the heaviest rains feel like a beautiful day. It was a big deal when she married a soldier from a nearby community. Everyone in the village celebrated for 3 days. It was seen to be an excellent fit. People thought highly of the groom's family, and marrying a soldier was a big deal in its own right. Priya moved in with his family, as was the usual. It was how things were. A daughter quits one family to join another. No one gave it a second consideration. We saw her at festivals, and while she appeared a little quieter, a little more reserved, everyone chalked it up to the duties of being a new wife in a new home. The world was how it should be. This was the normal world, a world that was so calm and orderly that no one could have imagined the storm that was coming. It would be caused by a monster who was 6 feet 8 inches tall and had a heart as dark as a moorless night. Amar was the name of the creature. He was the older brother of my Aunt Priya's spouse. In our society, an older brother-in-law is someone you look up to like a father. But Amar was not a paternal figure. He was a monster in human form. He was a huge man with fists like hammers and a reputation that followed him around. He was the village bully and the town goon. He did what he pleased and challenged anyone to stop him. People knew that he loved two things cheap: strong alcohol and fighting. They also asserted that Amar had never lost a fight. He moved with merciless efficiency, like a force of nature that left broken bones and shattered spirits in his wake. He was the personification of anarchy in a world that wanted order. He was like cancer. The first shocks of the earthquake that would destroy our family were very small. Priya wrote fewer letters. Her visits were brief. The light in her eyes, which used to be so bright, seemed to have faded. When my dad asked her if everything was well, she would merely grin a tired, weak smile and remark, "Being married is an adjustment, little brother." "You wouldn't understand," he said. And he didn't. How could he? His environment was still safe. His universe still made sense. The letter or phone call that started it all wasn't the true explosion. It arrived as a ghost. One night, without warning, my cousin Priya's son, who was 18, came to our house. He looked like he had ran all the way from his village. His clothing were ripped, and his face was pale and dirty with weeping. He fell into my father's arms, crying violently. His body shook with sadness so deep that it seemed to take the oxygen out of the room. My grandma prepared him some tea, my grandfather sat him down, and my father knelt in front of him and held his hands. "What is it? What happened?" Raj inquired, his voice tense with fear. And suddenly the narrative came out in a rush. A flood of terrifying words whispered. There wasn't just one thing that happened. It was a campaign of fear, a creeping, soul-crushing violation that had been going on for months. The beast Amar had set his sights on Priya. It started with rude things said while no one was around. Then there was the unwelcome touching in the kitchen. Then came the requests. He started making her have sex with him. He scared her into quiet by using his huge bulk and reputation for violence. He was a rapist, but he lived in the same house as the victim, which made it hard for her to get away. The plot was scary enough on its own, but the thing that really crushed my father's heart, the thing that made the blood in his veins turn to ice and then to fire, was that the family was involved. Priya's husband, who was a soldier, was gone on service for a long time, but Amar's own mother and father were present. They were aware. They observed the bruises she was trying to hide. They heard the quiet sobs at night, and they didn't do anything. They didn't say anything. The safety and well-being of their daughter-in-law was less important to them than the honor of their house and the fear of their hideous son. They decided to kill her to protect their sick peace. Her shepherds were the ones who held her down, and she was a lamb given to a wolf. My cousin choked on his words as he told me how he couldn't take it anymore. Once, he had tried to stand up to Amar, but the giant only grabbed him by the throat and held him against a wall till he almost passed out. His grandparents instructed him to be quiet and not cause trouble when he went to see them. He had finally taken some money and fled away to us, the only family he had left who might care. My father's expression shifted as he talked. The softness of the 19-year-old lad, the pampered ninth son, was gone. It was like seeing stone grow. His face lost its color and became rigid like granite. His eyes, which were typically full of fun and warmth, turned into two blazing flames. He didn't speak. He silently listened, his fists clenched so tightly that his knuckles turned white. The bomb had gone off. This wasn't just an attack on Priya. This was a stain on our name and a dishonor to our family. It was a call to arms. When my cousin was done telling his story, the room was quiet. There was a deep, stifling hush. My grandma was crying out loud. My grandfather, who was very stoic, held his head in his hands. But my dad stood up. He moved to the door and turned his back on all of us to look out into the dark. He stood there for a whole minute with his shoulders stiff. Then he turned around, and the sight on his face was one I had heard others talk about many times over the years. He looked like a man who had crossed a line in his own heart. He had made up his mind. There was no way to go back. Raj responded. He won't touch her again. His voice was low, barely a whisper, yet it had the cold finality of a judge's sentencing. That was the time. The point of no return. At that moment, my father saw a harsh, basic truthing: the system was broken. No police report would be able to control a beast like Amar. There was no local council that would dare to go against him. You couldn't plead for justice. You had to take it. He was a slender, 5'10", 19-year-old boy. He was very sure that he couldn't win a fair fight against a behemoth like Amar, and he knew for sure that this would not be a fair fight. His initial act wasn't violent. It was to gather people. He left the house and wandered through the dark, empty streets of the village like a ghost on a mission. He went to the houses of his best friends, the boys he grew up with, played cricket with, and told secrets to. He awakened each of them up and pulled them out into the cool night air. The old banyan tree in the middle of the village, with its drooping roots like sleeping snakes, was where he brought them all together. There were 4 other people with him: Samir, who was careful and intelligent; Vikram, who was built like a bull and was very devoted; and Rishi and Anil, 2 brothers who were often getting into mischief together. My dad told them the story under the dim light of the moon. He didn't yell. He didn't shed a tear. He spoke in a cold, firm voice, with each syllable hitting like a hammer. The five of them stood in silence when he was done. The only sound was the crickets singing in the night. They were simply kids. Almost guys. They were neither soldiers or assassins. They were farmers and workers. What he was suggesting was scary. It was crazy. Samir, who was careful, was the first to speak. Raj, what should we do? The man is a demon, and he'll kill us all. My dad glanced at him, and his eyes shone in the dark. He is one man. We are five. He gets drunk every night. Stupid drunk. That is when he is weak. That is when we find him. Vikram asked, "And what do you want me to do?" "Speak to him." "No," my father said, and the word was so cutting it might have cut glass. "We do what should have been done a long time ago. We teach him a lesson. We break him. We beat him so badly he never forgets. We send a message, not just to him, but to his whole family. You do not touch one of our own." There was no big speech or call to bravery. It was a straightforward, basic statement. This has nothing to do with the law. This had to do with blood. About respect. It was a promise made not with a handshake, but with the grim, determined nods of five young men who were about to leave their normal lives behind and enter a darkness from which none of them would return the same. My dad was no longer a boy who was just waiting for life to happen. He had turned into an Avenger. He had taken the first step on a path that would finish with a bloody fight in a dark alley and the death of a man. My father, the Avenger, wasn't a careful planner of revenge. He wasn't a Hollywood character who pinned pictures to a wall and drew lines with red string. He was a 19-year-old boy whose only guide was pure, unfiltered hatred. His plan showed how raw and primordial it was. It was really easy wait for the beast to become drunk, trap him in the dark, then beat him till he couldn't stand up anymore. There were no backup plans, no ways out, and no thought given to what would happen after the urgent, primal need for revenge. Maybe his moral compass was off, but it always pointed toward one magnetic north, keeping his sister safe. He saw the gray region clearly and jumped right in without thinking. He was going to use a lot of force, surprise a man, and hurt him badly. This was clear to him. To do this, he and his buddies would have to dull their own terror and mute the voices of reason that were screaming in their heads. They chose the same tool as their enemy: cheap, bitter rural liquor. This detail is really important. It's what makes this story so real and human. They weren't heartless murderers. They were scared kids who were trying to drink themselves into the men they believed they needed to be, even if it was just for one night. The fact that my father didn't feel bad about what he did for years thereafter didn't mean he was a psychopath. It meant he truly felt, to the core of his being, that what he did, no matter how brutal, was good. He was not the bad guy in his own story. He was the good guy. Amar, on the other hand, was a cartoonish version of evil. He was a flat figure in the finest sense of the word, a force of pure evil that didn't need a complicated backstory to explain why he needed to be killed. He was like a cancer that needed to be cut out. His one-dimensional personality was excellent for the plot. You didn't need to feel sorry for him, only understand why he had to go. He was a monster, and you can't talk to monsters. You kill them. And like many monsters in old stories, he possessed a fatal flaw, a single weak spot in his otherwise impenetrable armor. That was his normal way of doing things. Every night he would stumble home from the neighborhood bar, intoxicated and shouting, like a giant who was sluggish and clumsy because of drink. This pattern was so predictable that it was the only weakness in his defenses that my father and his buddies could expect to take advantage of. The plan, if you could even call it that, was the first step in the escalating activity. It was more of a shared understanding that they talked about quietly under the banyan tree. Vikram had added, "He leaves the den around 10. He's always in the back alley behind the weaver's shop. It's the darkest place in the village." That was all. That was the whole plan. place, time, and goal. It was clear how, with fists, feet, and anything else they could find. The second step was getting ready, which was a false courage ritual. They all convened in an old shed on the edge of my father's fields. Rishi had gotten a big bottle of the local bear, the kind that burns your throat and makes your stomach feel like it's on fire. They were sitting in a circle on the ground and passing the bottle around. The first sip was like a shot of liquid fire that shocked the body. They drank swiftly and on purpose, not for fun but to make a point. My dad once told me what that was like. He remarked that the booze didn't actually make him feel bold. It just made the dread go away. It put a buzzing wall between him and the huge thing they were going to perform. As he drank, the picture of his sister's face, which was smeared with tears, became sharper, while the picture of Amar's 6'8" frame became a bit less scary and a little more blurry. They were getting drunk on courage by drinking it from a bottle. How to face a dragon when you only have a stick and a prayer was an old dilemma that a young man found a way to solve. The ambush was the last step. They moved as the moon rose higher and cast long, skeletal shadows across the settlement. They were a group of ghosts, and the alcohol made them move in jerky, unnatural ways. They stood in the chosen alley, a narrow, stuffy passageway between two brick buildings that smelled like mold and old frying oil. There weren't any streetlights here. The darkness was almost complete, with just the faint yellow light from a window far away breaking it. They stayed put. My dad said that was the hardest part. The waiting. The drink was starting to wear off, and the arrogance that had been there at first was giving way to a feeling of unease. The sound of a rat scurrying, a dog barking far away, or leaves rustling in the breeze made them jump. They stood against the cold brick walls, their hearts pounding against their ribs, and the silence seemed to last forever. They were little boys again, terrified and confused, wondering what had made them so angry that they had to come to this dark, lonely area. Then they heard it, a song that was low and rumbling, out of tune and slurred. The sound of heavy, shaky footsteps crunching on the gravel path. A huge shape blocked out the weak light at the end of the lane. The dragon was on its way. The moment of confrontation wasn't like a movie. It was a messy, desperate burst of violence. The idea, which was very straightforward, fell apart in the first 2 seconds. As Amar stumbled into the alley, Vikram, the bull, was supposed to hit him from the side and knock him down. But Amar, even when he was really inebriated, acted like a cornered animal. He felt the movement in the dark and swung his fist, which was the size of a small melon, in a wide arc. He hit Vikram right in the jaw. It sounded like a branch breaking, a painful crack that resonated in the small area. Vikram fell to the ground like a sack of grain, not even realizing it. 1 down. 4 more to go. There was a lot of panic. Rishi and Anil, who were both scared and drunk, came at him from the front. They were like dogs biting a bear. They hit a couple times, but it was like hitting a brick wall. Amar yelled with wrath and seized both of them with his huge hands. He picked them up and smacked their heads together with a painful bang. They fell to the ground, moaning and confused. 3 down, 2 more to go. My father and Samir were the only ones remaining, and they were up against a giant who was hurt and angry. And then the odds grew even worse. 2 more people came from the opposite end of the alley. They were Amar's lackeys and drinking companions, who had come to see what was going on. The ambush had turned into a massacre. The trap had gone off, but they were the ones who got stuck in it. The strategy didn't just fail, it was a disaster. Samir, who was careful, saw it right away. "Run, Raj!" he cried, and then he ran away. But one of the lackeys got on top of him and tackled him to the ground. My dad was the only one there, facing the monster. Amar smiled, showing off his yellow teeth in the dark. He lunged. My dad wasn't a fighter like this. He tried to dodge and weave, but there was no way he could win. The strength of Amar was scary. He grabbed my dad by the shirt, which ripped in his hold, and slammed him against the wall made of bricks. The blow knocked the air out of him, and his head hit the rough surface hard. Stars blew up behind his eyes. He fell to the ground, confused and panting for air. This was it. This is how it all ended. He was killed in a dirty alley after letting down his sister, friends, and family. Amar loomed over him, breathing heavily and grinning with victory. He lifted his foot and stomped on my father's skull. And at that moment of total despair, something basic took over. It wasn't a thought. There was no plan. It was a basic instinct to stay alive. My father's hand, which was digging through the dirt and trash on the alley floor, closed around something hard. A plank of wood. A thick, heavy log that was probably intended to hold a door open was left lying around in the dirt. He didn't try to hit. He didn't use his brain. As Amar brought his foot down, my father swung the wood with all the vigor he had left in his body in one smooth, frantic stroke. Adrenaline, anger, and the thought of his sister's face drove him forward. The swing's arc was awkward but strong. It didn't make a lot of noise. It was a dull, wet, terrible thud. The wood hit the side of Amar's huge head dead on. Nothing happened for a heartbeat. Amar stopped moving. His foot remained in the air. He went from a scowl to an expression of deep, almost funny surprise. After that, his eyes rolled back in his head. He didn't fall down in steps. He fell down. The 6'8" monster fell all at once, like a big tree falling in the woods. His body hit the earth with a massive, final-sounding whump that shook the alley. "Be quiet." The lackeys, who had been hitting Samir, halted and stared. They stared at Amar's still body. They saw my father, who was 19 years old, on his knees, gasping for air and grasping a piece of wood that was covered in blood. Their faces didn't show rage. It was terror, fear that is pure and basic. They had just seen a boy kill the immortal monster in the village. My dad got up quickly. He grabbed Samir, who had a cut on his forehead and was bleeding, and pulled him up. "Get them," he said, gesturing to the other 3 pals who were either unconscious or groaning. The magic was over. The lackeys didn't hesitate when they saw that they were outnumbered by a group that had just killed their commander. They turned around and fled away, disappearing into the night. My dad and Samir, who were both very excited, were able to encourage Vikram, Rishi, and Anil to stand up. They were covered in bruises, blood, and hurt pride. They didn't wait to find out if Amar was dead or alive. They ran away. They stumbled out of the alley and ran into the darkness, leaving the monster's body behind on the dirt. The big plan for retribution had turned into a shambles, and it didn't finish with a message of justice. It ended with a desperate act of survival. They hadn't just beaten someone, they had done something much, much worse. And now they weren't heroes anymore. They were on the run. After that, it was a haze of panic and hiding. My dad didn't come home. He knew they would find him there. He ran to the country, where he hid in barns and abandoned huts. He relied on the compassion of distant relatives who would give him a piece of bread and a place to sleep for the night before cautiously telling him to keep going. The village was quick to spread news. Amar was still alive, not yet. He was alive but broken. The log hit him in the head and broke his skull, putting him in a coma. Not only Amar's family, but also the police sought my father. He was on the run for weeks. The righteous fire that had driven him had gone out, leaving him with the cold, gnawing truth of his circumstances. He was always gazing behind him and jumping at every unusual sound. He ate anything he could find since his stomach hurt from being hungry all the time. The narrative of my father's surrender is probably as well known in our family as the story of the struggle itself. He was fatigued after hiding for almost a month and living on scraps and old water, and he was filthy. And most of all, he was wary of eating terrible food. One day, he just strolled out of the fields, located the main road, and turned himself in at the police station closest to him. The officer on duty couldn't believe what he saw when he glanced at the scrawny, messy 19-year-old in front of him. According to the story, when the officer asked my father why he was giving up, he looked him straight in the eye and said, I'm tired of eating bad food. I'll confess to anything you want if you just get me a hot meal with some good curry. This act of defiant, almost funny pragmatism added to his growing myth. He wasn't a scared criminal. He was a man who still did things his own way. It should have been easy to prove the case against him. Assault and attempted murder. Things in the community, though, had changed. The spell of fear Omar had put over the town was shattered when he was in the hospital. People started to speak. People started to talk about how horrible he was and what he had done to my Aunt Priya. My aunt was no longer quiet now that she was safe back at our house. People in the neighborhood felt bad for her and completely sided with my father after they heard the account of her abuse. No one would speak out against him. When asked, all of his pals told the same story. Amar had attacked them, and they had fought back. It was his word against theirs, and his word didn't mean anything anymore. There wasn't enough proof or witnesses for the case to go on. My dad was let go. A few months later, Amar, who had been in a coma for a long time, died from his injuries. He didn't die with a roar, he died with a whisper. A piece of scrap wood in the hands of a furious 19-year-old boy ended his reign of terror. There was no consequence for my father in the eyes of the law. But what happened that night has effects on the rest of his life. He never once said he was sorry. When someone asked him if he felt bad for killing a man, he always gave the same answer. He would acquire a faraway look in his eyes, like the fire that had burnt so fiercely that night, and he would add, I did what I had to do. I protected my sister. That was the truth of it. His violent death, which was caused by anger and desperation, had a huge and enduring influence on our community. It was a bleeding, violent reset button. The narrative of what Ninth's son did to the monster that hurt his sister became a warning story that people in the community told each other for generations. It delivered a clear, unspoken message to every man who might contemplate of hitting a woman. There are consequences that go beyond the law. There are brothers, fathers, and sons who are looking. My father told me that from that day on, no lady in that village was ever mistreated or assaulted by her husband's family again. Amar's blood had carved a line in the sand. My father, the angry child, the killer by mistake, and the fugitive who gave himself up for a good dinner had become an unusual protector. He wasn't a saint. He was a man who fought back against violence with violence. But by doing this, he gave the ladies in his village a generation of peace. His tale was not one of violence, but of love. A love for his sister that was violent, messy, and complicated, but strong enough to change the world, or at least their small part of it. That is the story of the ninth son, more than anything else.